Ms. Graham.
Thank you. We were talking about the death message before lunch. What's the normal practice when you prepare a death message for relaying to the next of kin?
It depends with the circumstances of the death. A general death message, officers will be tasked quite regular to go out and pass a death message for, a routine death or something that's getting reported maybe in another area, and they would be asked to go and pass death messages.
We've heard it's a difficult task for officers to go and do that.
Yes, it is.
Is the wording of a death message prepared in advance?
Not routinely, no.
Who decides on the wording of a death message?
Again, depending on the circumstances of the case. If it's something that's fairly routine, the officers who go would discuss that before they go to the address, who would take the lead and what the words were that were going to be used.
If it's not routine, if it's out of the ordinary, is the practice to prepare a death message?
It can be. I've done it before in deaths which effectively are suspicious deaths, and it's not been prepared and read out. It's been still just an actual conversation that you go and try and give someone.
If it's an unexplained death, such as the one at Hayfield Road,
Yeah.
Is it normal practice to prepare something in writing to give to the officers?
No, it's not, no.
So in terms of paperwork and recording what message is to be delivered, tell us how that is normally done. Is there any normal procedure?
Not
or
for,
was there in 2015?
Not that I know about. Nothing that. Different if you were deploying family liaison officers, there may be a family liaison log where you would agree with the family liaison officer exactly what was going to be getting said. But for more routine cases or cases where it's just officers that are going to pass that, it's the message is pass ultimately that they have passed.
To what extent do the officers who'd relay the death message to the next of kin have discretion, or can they make their own interpretation of the death message?
If I've asked officers in the past to go and pass a death message, you just try and make sure that they're given a direct and informative message to what's taken, to what's affected. The fact that they're dead is an important part in being clear when you're passing that message.
And when you say that you've passed, do you mean you as a detective sergeant would pass the information to the officers who then relay it to the family?
Maybe not even as a detective sergeant, just as a duty sergeant, which would be more common in relation to death messages, to be honest, or regular messages.
So is there anywhere that we could find an accurate recording of a death message, or is it just a question of looking at various possible sources like statements, daybooks, notebooks, that type of thing?
For this incident?
I just mean in general.
In general, I actually don't think I could tell you where go and look, other than the family liaison log, if there's a family liaison officer identified.
So if there's not a family liaison officer, there's not a certain place where you would keep that information?
No.
Can we look at your statement, Perk 137, please? So this is your statement of the 11th of June 2015 that you gave to Perk. You see that? You'll have the hard copy. And if we can look at page 2 of that statement, paragraph 3. And you'll see it says, with regards to the death message delivered to Colette Bell. Have you got that?
Yes.
And thereafter the family. When Colette Bell was within Kirkcaldy Police Office, I spoke to D.I. Robson, and whilst I did think it was Shekubai who was dead, at that time there was no formal identification. So between me and Colin Robson, we delegated Wayne Parker to tell Colette Bell words to the effect that, and then you've got it in quotation marks here, a black male had been found dead and we suspected that it may be her partner, end of quotation marks. And I'm interested why you have that phrase in quotation marks there.
That's a summary of what the general information was that was passed.
Passed by you to DC Parker?
Yes.
Sorry, DS Parker. So when you say words to the effect that, and now you've said a general summary, we see there, it says a black male had been found dead. Do you see the word found there again?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Yeah. So did the word, or the words found dead, were they shared by you with DC Parker?
I've written that statement, well, in fact, I've mentioned it in the statement that I've done the day after, and I've mentioned those words again when I've done the statement with the park. I can't say for certain what words were used because I've not written it like we did later on. But the message that I've got in my daybook is for me more accurate in relation to what the message was that was to be passed.
Right. So let's go back to that entry in your daybook, if we may, just for a moment. Was that at 168?
Yes.
Right. If we could have that back on the screen, please. And this was on the left-hand side at 10:45. You've told us about the entry, and it says, "Tell Colette black male dead."
Yes.
Now, the other references in your self-penned statement of the 4th of May and the Perk statement in June use the words found dead.
Yes.
And we can see that found dead is not in your daybook. But I'm thinking about the words that you would have used to share the death message with DC Parker. How likely is it that you said to DC Parker, "Tell Colette black male dead"?
I don't know the exact words I used, and I'd be lying if I was saying what the exact wording was.
Do you think you would have said to DC Parker, "Black male dead"? It just seems very blunt if we look.
Yes, but I also don't think we went into the details of the circumstances in which he was found. So that's why I think that is more accurate.
The daybook.
Yes.
So if you were using your own words now to share information with an officer, and what you have in your daybook is "Tell Colette black male dead," how would you describe that to an officer who you're asking to go and relay a death message?
Well, if I was doing it again now in circumstances like this, I would be recording exactly what I've told them.
But if you were saying it, how would you phrase those 3 words, "black male dead"?
That's what I would say. I would say we need to get the message across that a black male is dead. Now, if I was doing that to an officer, you know, that's the key message that you want to get across there, and I would ask them to go and to effectively deliver that message.
And the words you would say are, "a black male is dead."
In the circumstances that we've got for this, that's...
From those words
Yes.
there,
Yes.
you wouldn't just say "black male dead," you would say "a black male is dead."
Yes.
Thank you. Now, we've heard evidence from Parker about delivering the death message to Colette Bell. And we've heard evidence from Colette Bell. And Colette Bell has a recollection, as she's explained to the chair, that her understanding of what she was told at the time was that she was told that Mr. Bayo had been found dead. He'd been found by a passerby, and she was under the impression that he'd been found murdered. And when she left, after she gave her statement, that remained the impression that she had, that he'd been found murdered. You've explained about the statements. You've explained earlier today it wasn't true that he was found dead. We know he was alive when the police arrived at Hayfield Road, and he lapsed into unconsciousness then. Was there anything at all that you remember saying to DC Parker, DS Parker, that indicated in any way that the male had been found dead or found by a passerby?
No.
Nothing that you said at all?
No.
Was there anything that you shared with Parker that would have given him the impression that the male had been found murdered?
No.
And finally, was there anything that you said when you were talking to Parker that would have given the impression that there was a warrant for the male's arrest?
No.
So you can't give any explanation why that may have become part of the conversation, if it did become part of the conversation?
No. Okay.
Can I ask you about the timing of the death message to Colette Bell and the nature of the identification at that stage? You've explained to us earlier today that identifying the male was a priority action as part of the initial investigation. And you've said in your statement that you didn't have a formal identification at the time that the decision was taken to relay the death message to Colette Bell. Can you tell us a little bit about why Colette Bell was given the information, the death message, at a time you didn't have a formal ID, you didn't have that sort of certainty?
Because at that time I thought it was the right thing to do, to tell her, because I was upstairs, there's a lady downstairs with a child reporting concern for someone, and I believed it was him from the information that I was getting. So I wanted to get that across to the officers to say, that wasn't a confirmed identification, but this is what we think we're dealing with, and we wanted to get that message out.
And does this link in with what you said earlier today about the importance of getting that information out to family quickly?
Yes.
And can you tell us what your expectation was at that time about a formal identification being carried out?
I didn't know how that was going to take place that day, whether we were going to be able to get identification from potentially police officers or pictures or something like that, or whether there would have been an arrangements for some sort of formal identification. I didn't know how that was going to play out.
Did you have any information about how the identification would be carried out at any point that day?
No, I don't actually know how that identification was confirmed eventually. I think it was done through police. I actually don't know for certain how we got that confirmation identification.
Was that something that you were involved in?
No. I remember asking, we need it, and trying to get it, but physically going and doing things for that, no, we didn't.
Who did you ask?
I think it was DS Davidson that was involved in trying to arrange and get the identification.
Now, we've heard that there was a DS Samantha Davidson. Is
Yes.
that who you're referring to?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And she was involved at a later stage about trying to carry out an identification at Victoria Hospital. Is that her? Were you aware that she was involved in doing that?
Yes, I'm aware DS Davidson was involved at the scene and then effectively tried to arrange to get out identification.
Were you involved in tasking her with identifying the male at Victoria Hospital?
I don't remember specifically tasking her, but I remember thinking that we needed to get identification, and I don't know whether that come from me or whether it was another officer asking DS Davidson to do that.
Is there anything in your daybook that would indicate you were involved in getting her to assist with identification?
I don't think there is.
Do you know how the male was identified?
I don't know how they've done it eventually. You know, some sort of, I'm sure it was a photograph from somewhere, some sort of confirmation that they were confirmed it was him.
Is that something you were aware of, or something you were just simply not involved in?
Oh, well, I wasn't involved in doing that process.
But you became aware that that had been done?
Yes, yeah.
Do you remember when you found out that there had been an identification of some sort?
I don't remember, no.
Can you explain the difference between identifying a person for the purposes of notifying the family compared to an identification for the purposes of having a post-mortem carried out?
So in terms of for identification, if I'm going to an address or asking officers to go to an address, and for example the police officers knew and had dealings with the person who'd passed away, and they could say for certain, I'd be looking for that message to pass to say certainty, person is deceased, and you can give that message. But that's not what we did initially with this. And in terms of for post-mortem examination, the normal process is for identification for 2 in life, 2 in death, normally prior to the post-mortem examination taking place.
Can you explain what that is?
And that would be for 2 people that knew the person who's passed away in life and can identify them, would go and identify that person as the person that's passed away, and 2 officers who have potentially dealt with them after he has died then do the identification. So that's normally done in cases I've been involved in prior to post-mortem.
Is that the normal practice where someone has died?
Yes, for where there's a requirement for post-mortem examination, yes.
Yeah. And the 2 in life would be family or a partner or a spouse or someone
Yes.
along those lines, next of kin.
Yes.
But you weren't involved with any of those arrangements?
No.
Can I ask you about some evidence we heard from Mitchell, Andrew Mitchell? He said that in evidence that you instructed him and he was with Parker, not to say to Colette Bell that there had been police contact with Mr. Bayo, her partner, that day. Did you say not to tell Colette Bell that there had been police contact?
Was that right at the start at 10:45?
Well, do you remember saying that to him?
I remember the message that we agreed to pass at 10:45 was we didn't go into the circumstances of him being found at that stage.
So that would be when the death message was given to Colette Bell?
Yes.
Why did you tell them not to say to Colette Bell that there had been police contact?
At that time, we didn't know what the extent of the contact was. We didn't know what had taken place, who had done what the circumstances were, and we still didn't have confirmation that that was Mr. Bayou at that time as well. Although I believed it and I wanted that message passed, we didn't have certainty that it was him. So at that stage, we said to pass the death message, and then we'll regroup and say, right, what message are we going to be passing to the family?
Was that your decision alone?
No, that was when myself and DS Robson were sitting.
When you say sitting, do you mean sitting in the same room?
Well, we were in the, it was when we were having the discussion round about passing the death message, what we're going to say, what can we say, and at that point it's like, well, it was just still so unclear about what had taken place on the police attendance, because, you know, the first thing you're going to get is question about that or question about that, quite rightly so, because that's what I would want to do if I was there. So it was, right, pass the death message, try and get identification with a view to then passing the further information about the contact. in the police involvement.
So you weren't aware of the extent of the contact, who did what, that type of thing?
Yes.
What would have been wrong, however, in sharing with Colette Bell that Mr. Bow had been alive when the police arrived at Hayfield Road, but then he'd become unconscious when the police were there? I mean, not going into the details of who did what or any of that, but actually not mentioning any police contact. I'm trying to understand why you wouldn't mention any contact.
I think we could have. We should have. At that time, we just didn't know how much information to give and what to give and what was going to be accurate and what wasn't. But I actually think what's right, what should we have said to them, and I look at that and think we should have said there was police contact, and the answer to that is I don't know what happened, and and just be honest and tell them that.
And do you think that would have helped? What way would it have helped if you had been honest and done the right thing?
I just think it would have helped as the investigation goes, because we've not told them at 10:45, or we never told Colette at that point, and I'm thinking, right, it's going to come soon, and before you know it, we're hours down the line, and they've still not got this information, and you're like.
And looking back now, how do you feel about that?
Not great. It's not nice.
So looking back now, with the benefit of hindsight, if you could do it again, what information would you have shared with Colette Bell at that time?
I think I would have said to Colette, there's been a call to the police, there's been some sort of contact, he's gone unconscious, he's gone to the hospital, and he's passed away. And then there would be hundreds of questions on the back of that, and you might not be able to answer these questions, but I think that's what, if something similar happened next week, that's what I would want to do.
When you were thinking about delivering the death message, you've mentioned earlier the flows and family liaison officers can deliver a death message. What consideration at that time did you give for just simply waiting and leaving it to the FLOs, the flows?
Yes, we could have, but then we're then going to be downstairs noting a statement in relation to a potential missing person, basically, knowing that I didn't think he was missing. I thought he was at Victoria Hospital, and I just didn't think that was right.
Can I ask you about the circumstances about the statement taking from Colette Bell? So we've heard evidence that after the death message was delivered, they took the officers, Parker and Mitchell, took a statement from her in the police office. Can we look at paragraph 116 of your inquiry statement, please? It says here, looking back, the question is whether that the best time for this statement, giving bad news with a child, she's never going to be happy, but is she okay to give information that is important to the inquiry at that point? Normal practice varies from case to case. If they can physically and mentally give a statement, then it's good to get that information. Was there a particular reason that a statement should have been taken shortly after the death message was relayed to Colette Bell?
You can capture a lot of information that would help drive the inquiry. So that's why we would try and capture that information if we can, the timeline, so we can then try and work out, what's happened and try and do that. Now, I did ask for that because I was trying to get things continuing moving at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Could it have waited? Yes. But again, we got information from Colette that helped then push on what we were trying to do.
Have you heard or listened to any of the evidence from Colette Bell?
No.
And we heard evidence that she was deeply upset, obviously having had the death message relayed to her. She was with her baby and her mother. And I think, summarising, if I may, that was a difficult experience for her, being asked to give a statement straight away. And there's a statement available for the chair that says perhaps that was insensitive to take a statement at that time in an interview room. Again, looking back now, was there anything you would do differently?
A police interviewing room is never a nice area for someone who's just had a message like that. It wasn't a great location. Could we have picked is there a soft suite? We've got a soft suite in a different station now that if it was to happen again, I would try to use that a bit more comfortable for them. I would still try and get information. I've got to be honest, I would try and get that, but if the person doesn't want to do it or is not capable of doing it, you don't force them to do anything. But I would still try to get information if I could.
And how do you explain to people that you're not forcing them to give a statement if they're not able to do that? How would officers explain that?
You would just judge the circumstances as you're speaking to them. You would know when you're sitting in a room, is this person coherent? Are they speaking okay? Are they able to tell us how they are? And a lot of times when you pass a death message, people go into autopilot. They're good, or not good, but they can give you precise information and they want it done.
Mm-hmm.
Some people want to give that information.
You mentioned a soft suite that was available. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
That's only more recently that we've developed a room at a police station in Fife, which we use for soft suite, which is for, a lot of times it's for survivors of sexual offences when they come in to speak to the police. Now, that's what it's for, but say if I had this situation again and we're going to a police station, use that room. It's basically like someone's living room, and it's a much nicer setting.
Is it a more comfortable surrounding?
Yeah. There's couches, there's tea, coffee, there's a toilet nearby. That would be better.
When you've said that you wanted the statement taken, was there any instructions given by you that day to DC Parker or Mitchell about the type of questions they should ask? Maybe lifestyle questions that should be asked?
I don't remember going into detail of what to cover. It would be a general statement in relation to Mr. Bayou and the circumstances of leading, in particular, leading up to the circumstances where we found ourselves that day.
All right. You have mentioned Mr. Zaid Sahid. How was it his name became known to you as part of your investigation? You've mentioned him in your daybook notes.
Yeah, I think that come from Colette.
So we've heard evidence from Colette that he had called her in the morning, and after that call she'd gone home to check on the position and then phoned the police.
Okay.
Do you remember when you received his name and who from?
It's in the daybook, which is 01066.
Right,
The page that starts with...
So that's your first page in your daybook. And where, so I've lost it on the screen.
On the screen, top right of the page.
Yes. So There's some words underlined in the right-hand page.
Unsure time, that says.
Unsure time. And then we see Zaid, and then just an arrow and says Zaid.
Yes.
And that was information from Colette Bell.
Yes.
And I think earlier you said that was information you probably noted during a call from her home by one of the officers.
Yes.
And then you said in brackets, spoke to him or speak to him. Is that what it says?
It looks like spoke to him
Right.
dash racist.
Do you remember if you had a telephone conversation with Saeed Saheed at a later point that morning?
I did, because I've read my statement, but I don't remember it.
All right. So let's look at perk 136. So I think this is your 4th of May statement, and it should be page 2, paragraph 5. So this is a statement you prepared the morning after, and you say here, I thereafter made telephone contact with witness Saeed Saheed on his mobile telephone to confirm his welfare and current location. I explained to witness Saeed that we were concerned for his friend and that the police required to speak to him. Witness Saeed Saheed confirmed that he was within his home address and he would wait at the address for police officers to arrive. During the conversation, Saeed Saheed confirmed that he had been in the company of deceased earlier that morning at a friend's address, and that was Martin Dick and Kirsty MacLeod's home address. He also confirmed that he had been involved in an altercation with deceased within his home address at Arran Crescent. I did not get specific details from witness Saeed Saheed at that time. So this was a telephone call that you made to Saeed Saheed on the morning of the 3rd of May.
Yes.
And where was he, as far as you were aware, when you spoke to him on the phone?
Well, the statement says that he was at his home address.
His home address. And which officers did you send out to Saeed Saheed?
I don't know off the top of my head what officers went to speak to him.
But speaking to him was a priority action.
Yes.
And did you send officers to go and collect him?
Yes.
You don't remember what the address was, or the area, or the town, or any of that?
No, I can't remember.
And how long was that conversation?
I don't know, because I actually don't remember the conversation. I only remembered it when I went to read my statement again.
Do you now today have any recollection at all of that?
Yeah. I feel like I should, because it's quite an important thing. But on that day, we were doing a lot, and then I don't remember speaking to him, and I don't have any notes in my book either.
Right. So there's no record of it in your day book that
No.
would help you. And if it wasn't for this entry in your statement, you don't have any recollection at all?
No, I don't remember it.
All right. Do you remember Saeed Saheed at some point coming to Kirkcaldy Police Office and speaking to officers there?
I don't know if he come to Kirkcaldy or not.
All right.
The officers were asked generally to take him to a police station, so I don't know if that was done in the town that he was in.
Do you have any recollection of his involvement that day?
No.
Is there anything in your day book that would help you with that?
No.
No. Can I ask you, in terms of thinking about priority actions, you've talked about the identification of the male at Victoria Hospital and Samantha Davidson going to carry that out. You've talked about Saeed Saheed being a priority and Martin Dick being a priority. Can you explain why speaking to Saeed Saheed, for example, was a priority and actioned before the next of kin, the family, Mr. Bio's sister, was told about his death?
At the time we done that, passing that message, I was thinking that Colette is the next of kin at that point, and then I moved on to these other actions, and it was only till later in the day when I was contacted and said, listen, look, we're extending the next of kin effectively to include closer family relatives.
Now, there's some references in your daybook to Caddy Johnson.
That's right.
When did you first become aware that there were other family members that would be next of kin?
That was later on in the day when I was asked to pass a further message to effectively...
Who asked you?
I don't know, because I don't know who's given me the note, and I don't know whose writing was on that note.
Is this a note that...
It was...
You mean there's writing in your daybook that isn't yours?
Yes, I stapled something into my daybook.
You described a list of officers that you didn't know.
That's it, yep.
Can you tell us what page you're referring to?
So, it's 01072.
So this is the final page prior to the Tuesday, the 5th of May entry.
Yes.
072. And we see here, as you say, there's no lines on that sheet of paper.
That's right.
It says sister next of kin, Caddy Johnson.
Yep, that's correct.
Right. Were there no previous references to a sister, Caddy Johnson, at all?
I've got an earlier, or not an earlier note, because see, I've stapled that in my book at the end of the day.
Right.
Okay, so the mention I've got in my book, Caddy Johnston, next of kin sister, 1510 hours. So that's when I was aware at that point.
And what page is that you're reading out from?
That's page 01070.
70, please. Yeah, so if we look at the left-hand side, we see at the top Caddy Johnson, next of kin sister, 1510 hours. We've heard that the death message for the Johnsons was delivered at round about that time in the afternoon. So you were aware by that time that there was a sister?
Yes.
Colette Bell gave evidence that she had mentioned the sister when she was in Kirkcaldy Police Office in the morning after the death message had been delivered to her, and that was shared with the police at that time. Had you had that information shared with you at that time?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know, sorry.
Have you got any entries in your daybook that would help you to recollect that?
I don't have any other entries, and this is the first entry in relation to family.
And can you tell us from page 70 when you made that entry about Caddy Johnson?
I think that was 1510 hours. I think I've got next of kin sister, 1510 hours.
Oh, right.
So whether that's at the time that the officers delivered the message or whether it's the time I've recorded it, I can't say that for certain.
So is it possible that this entry in your daybook was recorded after 1510 on the 3rd of May?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you think of any reason why, if Colette Bell shared information with the officers in the morning about the existence of Caddy Johnson and being Sheikh Abayo's sister and next of kin, that wouldn't have been shared with you?
I don't know. I don't know if it was shared with me, or if it was shared with me, if I've passed on or not. I genuinely can't remember.
If you'd had information in the morning about a next of kin, would you have made arrangements about delivering a death message to them?
I certainly would have passed that up the line management to say, right, okay, what we're going to do. But my memory of this is they approached me about the next of kin at that point. So And when I say they, I don't know who. That the information come to me to go and get this message passed. And then just underneath there, there's some writing. I think that's an update I've got from Mitchell and Parker, where it says 10 p.m. at our house. Drinking at that time, Saeed left. So I think that's potentially information that Mitchell and Parker have passed to me after that message has been passed.
Can we look briefly at page 69, the PS 01069? So this will be the page immediately prior to this. Because I think earlier you were talking about... so this page 69 is Kirsty MacLeod. There's information about, you've already described it to us, about a fight, watching a fight at Martin Dick's house. And then at the end it says Zahid. Can you read the...
Zahid follows,
Zahid
and then an
follows.
arrow, and then Martin, and then an arrow, and then help me text.
Right. And then where was that information coming from?
I think that's come from Kirsty MacLeod, to the officers that have been speaking to Kirsty MacLeod, and that's what I've been given in an update.
And then if we turn back to 70, please, which is the equivalent of the next page in your day book, we then see Caddy Johnson listed there. Does that help you to recollect where that information came from?
Unfortunately, it doesn't, no.
Now, earlier today, you were talking about your concerns about the delay between sharing the death message with Colette Bell and not sharing with the sister. As I understood you, you were saying you were aware that there was a delay during that time. Although what you're saying now is you're not sure when you found out about the sister.
I don't know when I found out about the sister, but I remember thinking, we've got to get information out there in relation to, well, the police contact and the confirmation of his death.
Right. So were you aware in the morning that there were other family members?
I don't remember.
You don't remember?
Sorry.
Can we move on to Martin Dick's house? You've noted that Martin Dick was a priority action.
Yes.
And we know, we've heard evidence, Martin Dick wasn't at Hayfield Road. So on the Sunday morning he was at home with his then partner Kirsty MacLeod, now his wife. And that we've heard evidence that Mr. Bio had been at his house the night before watching a boxing match, which I think you've referred to in your notes in the day book. He's given evidence that 4 crews turned up at his house, and I wonder if you could explain why 4 crews were sent to Martin Dick's house.
4 crews, you mean 4 police vehicles?
Yes.
I actually don't know who went to Martin Dick's house. I'd have to...
All right. Can you tell from your day book?
I don't think I've got identified who went to what address. No, I've just got the lists of the officers, so I'm actually unsure who went to Martin Dick's address.
Right. And thinking back now, can you explain why there would have been 4 crews sent to his address?
If there was potentially going to be more people at that address, if there's certainly Mr. Dick, Miss MacLeod, there's 2 people at that address. I don't know if there's any other people at that address that were traced. I genuinely don't know.
The evidence we've heard is there wasn't anyone else
Okay.
at the address. I'm just wondering if you had an awareness as you were helping with that part of the investigation.
I remember asking officers to go to that address, who they were. I don't know, I don't remember exactly who the officers done that, and I don't know how many attended at the address.
Did you have any concerns at that time that would have merited sending 4 crews?
No.
No. We've heard evidence from a DC Bellingham, who's one of the names on your list.
Okay.
And he wondered if one of the possibilities was maybe concern for officer safety. He didn't know, but he said that could have been one of the possibilities. Are you aware of any concerns that you had at the time?
I can't think of any reason. You know, officer safety, you think about it all the time. It's natural you would do that, but you know, there was nothing that that was known on that day to me anyway, in relation to sending officers to that address that would raise it.
DC Bellingham said it would have been the SIO who was responsible for the decision to send crews to Martin Dick's house. Is that correct, or would it have been your responsibility?
The decision to actually go to that address would ultimately sit with the SIO, you know, who would tell me we need to go and get these witness statements or whatever. So that would be for me to say to the officers, right, let's get up to that address. So I suspect that's probably come from me during the time that I've spoken to them.
Right. Do you remember why there would have been a need to seize Martin Dick's house, or to secure that house?
I think by this point there was a suggestion that there may have been drugs consumed, or there's a reference to drugs. So, you know, a consideration is, has something that is potentially consumed caused his death? So I think that would be the route we were going down in relation to Mr. Dick's address. If he's been at that address and there's a concern that he's potentially used drugs there.
And if he had consumed drugs there, how would seizing Martin Dick's house have assisted the investigation?
Well, if you were to do eventually, if the decision was made, I don't know what happened at Mr. Dick's house, but consideration, there may be examination of that property or address.
And again, in relation to searching Martin Dick's house, what would the rationale be for searching his house?
Searching it when the officers went out.
So officers would go out to Martin Dick's house, seize or secure that house, and then there would be a search carried out on that house. Was that something that you were involved in instructing?
As far as I'm concerned, there wasn't a search done when I was involved that day. It was a case of, let's try to secure these scenes should they be required for any sort of examinations.
So you weren't party to any decision making about searching Martin Dick's house?
Not in terms of if there were searches took place, I wasn't involved in that.
That wasn't you. And as far as you're concerned, were you aware of any connection between Martin Dick's house and the events of Hayfield Road that would have merited seizing and searching that house?
At that time, you just don't know what's caused Mr. Bale to pass. Mm-hmm. So for me, if there's a chance that that's connected, well, it means you gather that and then you can discount it if that's not the case.
Right. Were you party to any decision to have clothing seized from Martin Dick or his partner Kirsty MacLeod?
I have an entry in my book at some point,
right,
which is 1070.
Thank you, that's the one we have on the page,
yep.
On the screen, sorry. And we see references to Martin Dick on the right-hand side. Do you want to read that out?
Yes, so it's Martin Dick dash DNA sample, where is clothes, Zahid Said, FME stroke clothing, DNA samples and DNA swab, Kirsty MacLeod DNA sample, and then underneath it says deceased Sheku Bale.
Can you explain to us why DNA samples were taken from Martin Dick?
DNA samples are quite commonly taken from people if the police are seizing productions in an investigation, for example, a jumper, and it goes away to the forensic lab and it gets tested. You would have to test whose DNA is on that, and that sample is used to eliminate or to identify whose DNA is on a particular item or a production.
Why would it help the investigation to eliminate Martin Dick's DNA from any item seized?
So if Mr. Bayou, his clothing that he was wearing on that night, if he's been in close contact with Mr. Dick, i.e. sitting next to him on the couch, sitting next to him, touched each other or anything like that, when it would be examined by the scientist, they could then say that DNA relates to Mr. Dick. So that would be, it's fairly routine to get that.
And how would that help the investigation into Mr. Bayou's death?
Well, you've got to think, depending on what caused Mr. Bayou's death, that may, because we didn't know at that stage, so if you're going to be getting examination done on his clothing and everything like that, you need to try and rule out all these different sources of the evidence, so that's why I would try and capture that.
And so was that also the reason why you took DNA from Kirsty MacLeod?
Yes.
And Kirsty MacLeod has provided a statement to the chair saying that she was told her DNA would need to be taken to eliminate it because she'd cuddled Sheku Bayo the night before. Does that make sense to you?
It does, because that shows that she's been in close contact with Mr. Bayou, and a perfect example is her touch DNA may be on his clothing.
And why would it be important to exclude Kirsty MacLeod's DNA from any items recovered from Mr. Bayo after his death at Hayfield Road?
Because
or as a result of the events there?
Depending on the cause of death for Mr. Bayou, you would then effectively have some sort of forensic strategy meeting potentially, and then see, like, what are we going to do with this clothing, if that was going to be an important part of how he died. So you would try to get the DNA from people who have been in contact with him to effectively, so you've not got effectively an unidentified DNA on a bit of clothing. A stranger, effectively, you would know who that person relates to.
Right. Can we look at paragraph 149 of your inquiry statement, please? And this is, you'll see where this comes in the inquiry statement is after you've been talking about DNA samples and such like. And you say at 149, I would have spoken to Colin Robson about this, I would have spoken to him about this and noted what we needed to do with DNA samples. DNA we would quite often get when someone dies or passes away. If any productions are sent further down the line, then we'd see what DNA is, for who. Yeah, you would ask them for a sample and take a swab from the inside of their mouth. That would be used for comparison with any productions that were seized. And so, when did you speak to Colin Robson about the DNA and the possible swabs?
I don't remember speaking to Colin Robson about that, but I'm saying I would have, because it's generally something that you would discuss with the SIO to make sure that they're in agreement with what you're going to be doing with that.
And who gave the instruction to recover these samples from Mr. Dick and Miss MacLeod?
I don't specifically remember getting an instruction to do that, but it's in my book there. It's certainly something that I would have discussed and confirmed before we'd done that.
Right. And what was the authority that the officers had to take the DNA sample from Mr. Dick or Miss MacLeod?
That would be consent, definitely.
And you've already given evidence about how you would like, how best practice obtaining consent can be demonstrated in a notebook with a signature.
Yeah.
Were you aware of whether consent was obtained from Mr. Dick or Miss MacLeod?
I've never checked that. I don't know.
Is there any obligation on possible witnesses to give consent to give a sample?
No.
If they had withheld their consent for any reason, would you have had grounds for a warrant?
I don't think so at that stage, no.
And I think in paragraph 150, you explain that you did not seek a sample, a DNA sample from Colette Bell. If it was happening again tomorrow, I would ask for DNA from Colette Bell, and you would want that. And again, you repeat that consent is the basis for taking a sample like that. So you would actually ask Colette Bell for a sample?
I would, but I don't know if the timing in relation to she's just had a death message, whether you would do it at that point, but you would want to collect that as you would with all these other people.
And I'm conscious of the time, but I've just got one or two other questions to complete this section. We've heard that officers' DNA wasn't required or requested because their DNA is held. Is that correct?
I think when we join, we give our DNA.
Right. And we may also hear further evidence that in terms of post-incident procedures, that it is an option to consider taking DNA from officers. Were you party to any discussions with D.I. Robson that day about whether or not to take DNA from officers?
No, I wasn't involved in any of the officer side of it.
Or any samples from officers?
No.
Right? And there's nothing in your daybook that would indicate that was something that was considered or discussed with you?
Not involving me.
All right, thank you very much. I'm conscious it's just
Yes, thank you. I should explain that in order to give the stenographer a short break in the afternoon, we're going to stop around 3 o'clock each day for 15 minutes, and they will sit on till 4:15. Yes, Ms Graham.
Thank you. Could we turn to paragraph 153 of your inquiry statement, please? And you'll see that this begins a section where you're asked about Zahid Saeed's address. And we'll get this on the screen. And it says, there's a redaction, but you're talking about Zahid Saeed's address. I don't know who else lived at the property. I know there was other people at the property. I remember when they were securing the house, there may have been a relative in a wheelchair. So one of the things that came up with that, I don't know what officers were involved at that address, it would have been the same procedure as the earlier addresses. And then at 154 you say again, because no feedback from occupants and difficulty, I assume we have consent to seize the property. So as I understand the position, there was an instruction relayed by you on behalf of the SIO to two officers to attend this property, and there was an indication from you at that time that you didn't actually think there was anyone in the address. Do you have any recollection of that?
Where have I recorded that?
This is a question that I've been provided with by some of the core participants to ask you. And there's an airwave transmission, which I don't think we have on the playlist for today. It's PS 01194. And you relay instructions from the duty SIO to two officers to attend, and you indicate that you didn't think there was anyone at that address, so it was just about securing the property. Do you have any recollection of that?
No.
No. Do you know, I mean, you'd obviously identified Saeed as a priority action. Your statement, your operational statement noted that you'd made telephone contact
Yes.
with him. You've explained already today that you didn't have much recollection of that actually
No.
until you'd read the operational statement.
That's right.
And you've not really been able to help us with the details today about what happened during the day regarding Saeed. But as part of your memory and your recollection of events now, do you remember knowing anything about that address or the arrangements made for that address or to seize it?
I don't. I just remember about contacting about there was an issue in relation to someone was wheelchair access at the address. That was one of the things that stuck in my mind, but they managed to resolve it.
Right, and you mentioned that in paragraph 155 that you managed to resolve it. How was it resolved?
I genuinely don't know. I can't say.
All right. Were you involved in resolving that issue?
No, the officers who were at the address, I believe, managed to sort that.
And was that the information that they shared with you, that they had an issue but they'd sorted it?
Yeah, that my memory is, and I actually can't even remember who it was that went to that address, but I just remember that there was an issue with the mobility of one of the occupants, and then the next message I got was, it's fine, we've managed to resolve this.
And is that really the extent of your memory today?
Yes.
And then at paragraph 160, we can briefly look at that. You're talking about the house was being seized because it's where Saeed went afterwards. And he'd gone there post-contact with Mr. Bayo. To be honest, on the day, we never done anything with that house. That was one I did speak to Colin Robson about. One, that the instruction was to get that house. In terms of what we were going to do with that house, I don't know what they were going to do and what they did do. Tell us when you had that conversation with Colin Robson.
I do remember this, and I'm saying that was one I did speak to Colin Robson about. I believe I spoke to Colin about all of these, but this, because it was slightly later in the day that we got that, and I remember thinking, oh, are we getting that house as well? And it was probably one that maybe I didn't really think about at the time, but he come in and said it was an address that we're looking to secure for potential examination.
When you say you didn't think about it at the time, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's one that well, I've not routinely thought about that at that point, but you know, maybe I should have. But
Was this one of the addresses that you'd had on your list?
I think it was actually. I think it might have been.
If we go back to your day book for a moment,
Yeah.
so maybe, was it 67 or 68?
Sorry, it was 68 on the right-hand
68.
side.
And you had your list of addresses, and then it says Zaid Sahid, and it gestures to Sahid home address.
And it's got dash home address, yeah.
Now, we may have some evidence in terms of written statements that Mr. Sahid was later taken to a property in St Andrews,
Okay.
but there was also a property in the Kirkcaldy area. And I'm wondering, from what you remember now, was it a different address from where he lived to his parents? Or do you know anything about that at all?
I don't remember that.
You don't remember? Is there anything in your daybook notes that would help you remember when you had this conversation with Colin Robson?
No, sorry, there isn't.
Right. And you say this is one you did speak to Colin Robson about. This is in paragraph 160. And tell us why that was one that you spoke to Colin Robson about.
I'm certain that we spoke about all of these properties, but this, I remember at some point, D.I. Robson saying to me that they're looking to get that address as well. And for some reason it sticks in my head.
And I mean, we've discussed this earlier today, but we've heard evidence that it wasn't simply a mobility issue and a wheelchair issue, that there was equipment in the house, that the gentleman who was disabled had a brain injury and was quadriplegic and had mental health issues as well and needed significant care. Do you remember anything about that?
Sorry, no.
Was any of that shared with you by the officers?
I don't remember anything to do with that.
Was that part of any part of your discussion with Colin Robson that day?
No.
Can I move on to the afternoon? We've touched upon the death message to Caddy Johnson, and we've heard evidence from Caddy Johnson about the delivery of the death message and again it was Mitchell and Parker who attended. And could we look perhaps at Perk 136? So this is your first statement, the 4th of May, page 2, paragraph 7. And if we have that on the screen, you'll see here that it says about 15:10 hours, I instructed Mitchell and Parker to attend at the home address of the deceased sister Caddy Johnson to formally deliver the death message to the family. Identification of the deceased had been confirmed by DS Davidson. The officers were instructed to deliver the message and inform them that a family liaison officer would later be in contact to note full details from the family. Following the delivery of the message, I was informed senior management would like to attend at Locust to visit the family. I requested that DC Parker and DC Mitchell return to Locust to clarify if they would like to be contacted further. So we've heard that there was an initial visit by Mitchell and Parker to the Johnsons' house, and that you've noted that at being about 3:10 in the afternoon.
That's correct.
From your memory now of the events, was there any alteration to the instructions to Mitchell and Parker about the death message that was to be delivered?
The only difference at that stage was that we now had confirmation that it was Mr. Bow.
So the identification had been firmed up compared to when it was delivered to Colette Bill?
Yes.
And so if DC Mitchell has said there was no separate death message prepared for this first visit to the Johnsons. There'd been no change effectively. Would you agree that that was correct?
There was the change was that it was Mr. Bayou, where the earlier message was that we thought it was Mr. Bayou.
And in terms of that first death message delivered to the Johnsons, looking back now, how happy are you with the information that was shared with them? You're shaking your head.
Yeah, we should have given them more. We should have been. We were past that death message because flows were going to come in later on and provide that information, but that should have been done.
So again, just for their benefit, what sort of information, looking back now, do you think you should have shared with them?
Very similar to what I said in relation to telling Colette earlier on, that there had been police contact, there had been calls to the police, and even by that time we might have known a bit more information, more specifics about what is taking place. So yeah, I think that could have been delivered at that time.
Thank you. We've then heard, and you mention in your statement, that there was contact between you and DC Mitchell and DC Parker about them returning for a second visit. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you remember about that? The discussion you had with them?
The exact timeline of this I can't give you for certain, okay, but I remember them coming back to me and basically being, they're almost like in shock, because they were clearly getting asked hundreds of questions, quite rightly so, and I remember sitting going, you know, we're going to have to give more information. So at some point I ended up, I don't know where Colin Robson was, but I went to what was the old gym hall at Kirkcaldy Police Station, Chapter Door, where the management was, and I'd said that, I says, officers have passed the death message, we need to give something, or what do you want us to tell them? That's what I said. And at that time, I believe it was the detective super says, we'll come back to you shortly, and then that's when I was then given a form of words to pass.
Do you remember what time that was?
It was after 3:10 and before 4:10.
Right, so during that window?
During that window, yeah.
And Mitchell and Parker had returned to Kirkcaldy Police Office to speak to you?
I don't know if they returned or if they phoned me. I think it may have been a phone call. And I just remember going, you know, they were clearly, they were put in a position where they didn't have information to give to family, and, you know, I remember thinking to myself, it wasn't fair to ask them to do that.
If Mitchell had said they did come back actually to the police office, would you disagree with him?
No, I wouldn't disagree. I can't say for certain whether it was face-to-face or not.
Right. And you've mentioned the gym hall. Is that part of Kirkcaldy, or was it part of Kirkcaldy Police Office?
Part of Kirkcaldy Police Station at the time. It's an old big hall at the top of the building where there were a collection of different management.
And who was in the gym hall?
Definitely Detective Superintendent Campbell, because he's the one that subsequently come out to me, and there were others who I don't know who they were.
I don't know. But the person that spoke to you was Detective Superintendent Pat Campbell.
He was the one that basically said, right, we'll be back to speak to you shortly.
What was his role that day?
He was for me, he's the SIO's boss, so Colin Robson would have linked in with the on-duty Detective Superintendent, so he was effectively the senior SIO, is what I would call it.
And the others in the room, although you didn't know them, did you know what their positions were, what their roles were?
There were a variety of different senior officers. It was quite a mad memory of it. There was quite a few people in there. And let's say I never went in for any length of time. It was basically a chap at the door to say, can we get this extra information out?
And you were given something by Detective Superintendent.
Yes.
And can we look at Perk 136 again, please? And this time look at the final paragraph on page 2, paragraph 8. And then here it says, I subsequently contacted DC Mitchell by telephone. Do you remember when that was?
I don't have a time.
No. And asked that they provide...
Sorry, 1610 hours. Statement to family provided to DC Mitchell is in my book.
So that's when you called DC Mitchell?
Yes.
They provide the following statement to the family and that they would be contacted again later that evening. The statement was, and again you've got this in quotation marks, following an incident this morning in the Hayfield Road area of Kirkcaldy, officers from Police Scotland have been attempting to arrest Sheku Bayo, during which time he became unconscious, conveyed to hospital by Scottish Ambulance Service, and despite best efforts by medical staff, died shortly after 9 a.m. this morning. And that's end of quotation marks. Where did you get this statement that is in the quotation marks in your operational statement?
I was given that by the Detective Superintendent who come down to the DC's room that I was sitting in.
And that was a handwritten
Yes.
note that was given to you. And this is different from the earlier message that had been given to the Johnsons by Mitchell and Parker.
Yes.
And tell us, before I go into this, was Robson involved in any way with this communication between Detective Superintendent Campbell and you?
I don't remember him being there when I was given the note, and I took it from the Detective Superintendent, so whether he was informed by the Detective Super, I don't know. I don't know if I've told him as well.
Right. All right. And is this noted in your day book as well?
I've written at 1610 hours statement to the family provided to DC Mitchell, so I must have received that shortly prior to me giving that message to DC Mitchell to pass that to the family.
Right. Now, we've heard from DC Mitchell that he, if I can say, wasn't entirely happy with being passed this second death message. And he gave evidence that he thought you weren't entirely happy. And you said something along the lines of, you're not going to like this. Do you remember that telephone conversation?
I remember phoning DC Mitchell and saying, yeah, words to that effect, because I was putting him back into a really hard position.
Why do you say that?
Because he's going to have to go back to a family who have just been asking him so much information about their loved one, to go back and to read 3 or 4 lines, which is going to lead to another 200 questions. So they were in a hard position at that point.
Why didn't you wait and leave it to the FLO, the flows, or leave it to a more senior officer?
I felt at that stage that the family should have been informed of things. So I've went up to that room to say my opinion of what I thought, and they've come back to me and said, I think you should say this. Now, that information, I still think they needed to get. They did need to be told.
Right. So the priority there was to tell them.
Yeah.
Rather than to wait for someone else to do it.
You could have waited, but then we'd waited for it. We'd waited for a period of time. How long do you delay that? Maybe I'm wrong with that thought. Maybe we should have waited for the flows, but I deep down still think that telling them was the right thing.
All right. And can I ask you to look now, please, at Perk 137. So this is your statement from June. because I'd just like to ask you about what else was happening at this time. And I'd like you to look at page 3, paragraph 1. And you see, after the first visit to the home of Caddy Johnson, so it's at the top of page 3, I was speaking to Chief Superintendent Jerry, I think we've heard his name's Gary McEwen, in the corridor of Kirkcaldy Police Office when I told him that the death message had been delivered to the family. At this time, he told me that senior management would be visiting the family. I assumed it would be him. He never confirmed he was going. And I suppose I'm trying to understand, in terms of the chronology of events, when you were speaking to Gary McEwen and when you were getting the message from Detective Superintendent Campbell.
I spoke to Gary McEwen in the corridor, very briefly, and he'd mentioned about the fact that the family were going to go up, and I actually thought, brilliant, because I thought, great, you've got a person, you know, to go there and to give this information. And then there was a delay, and then it was like, it was maybe not going to happen. And it's round about that time that I've went and says, what are we going to say? And then that's when I got the note back after that. So I don't know why, but I think they were going to visit, then they weren't going to visit, and then we got a form of words, and then they did visit after that.
Right, so Mitchell and Parker deliver the first message.
Yes.
They returned Kirkcaldy Police Office.
Yep.
You have a conversation with Gary McEwen at some point. He's going to go, and then you're not sure if he's going to go.
That's right.
At some point, Mitchell and Parker have been sent back to the Johnsons to tell them that a senior officer is going to come and visit them.
Yes.
And then you make a phone call to DC Mitchell saying there's another death message.
That's right.
Is that right? I don't want to put ideas
no,
into your
no,
head.
I think that I'm pretty sure that's the order.
That's the order it was happening. Is there anything in your daybook that would clarify that or indicate that that's not correct?
No, I've not taken any notes in relation to my contact with the Chief Superintendent at the time.
Right. Okay, but you've had a conversation with him. Mitchell and Parker are on the way back. You phone Mitchell and you give them the death message that you've got from Detective Superintendent Pat Campbell.
Yes.
Right. And that's the death message that we've just read out.
Yes.
That's the fuller death message.
Yes.
Tell me what you thought of the wording of that death message. So this is actually the third death message that's been delivered that day, but the second to the Johnsons. Were you satisfied with the wording of that death message?
I was just relieved that they were actually going to be getting some sort of information at that point. So, right, great, the information flow is going to start for now. So they're going to get that message, and then the flows can come in afterwards, and then they could be then the good point of contact for the afterwards.
We've heard from, let's have that message in front of us. It's PS 05793. I should have had this on the screen. I think this is a bit of, we'll see handwritten paper. Do you see that? Is that the handwritten death message?
Yes.
Statement for next of kin. You see? Following an incident this morning in the Hayfield Road area of Kirkcaldy. You see that?
Yes.
If we go down the screen, you'll see the full text.
That's right.
That's the message you were given by Campbell. And we've heard from DC Mitchell that he thought this death message was too open, it lacked clarity and didn't provide more detailed explanation, and he thought the family would, as he put it, kick off.
I wouldn't say that. I'd say that the message there, it gave at least some information in relation to what had happened that day, because by this point, as far as I'm aware, they still don't know what's happened to their loved one at that point. So it's given confirmation that the police have been sent to a call, officers have gone, attempt to arrest, become unconscious, conveyed to hospital, and it's actually telling you, dying at the hospital. as well, or does it's mentioned? Yeah, conveyed to hospital by ambulance service. So it does give some information.
Right. So you were happier with that message?
I was certainly happy that they were given something.
All right. And let's go back to your statement of the 11th of June. So this is Perk 137. And this time I'd like to look at page 3, paragraph 2. And this is where you were talking about Chief Superintendent Gary McEwen. Paragraph 2, I spoke to him about what the family should be told, and he said that it would be an SIO decision. And that's when Pat Campbell got involved, and he later handed me the handwritten statement. So was it Gary McEwen that told you it should be an SIO decision?
I don't remember that now. I've only just read that back. I remember speaking to him, but I don't remember him saying to me what would be disclosed would be an SIO decision. I don't remember that.
What was it that made you go to Pat Campbell about this death message rather than Robson?
I've been thinking about that because I was going to call on D.I. Robson all day. I don't know where he was. I don't know if he was in the room. I don't know if there was a meeting. But by that time, I'm speaking to Andy and Wayne, and I could see how they are and how they feel about how the family are feeling at that stage. So that's when I'm really trying to push things on.
Right. We may hear from Detective Superintendent Campbell that the form of words in this message were discussed by him and Chief Superintendent Leslie Bowl. Lindsay Bowl? Leslie Bowl. Leslie Bowl. Was she in the gym hall? Do you remember seeing her?
I don't know.
And then let's look at page 2, paragraph 10. So this is the final paragraph on page 2 of the same statement, 137. This is your PERC statement of the 11th of June. And if we look at the final page, final paragraph, it says, I previously gave instructions to Parker and Mitchell when they delivered the pre-prepared statement, which in effect was the third message. That's Colette Bells was the first.
Yep.
I knew that my detectives would get bombarded with questions from the family on the back of this prepared statement, and I specifically told them not to answer any questions directed at them as they were not in a position to answer. Can you give us a little bit more of an explanation there?
Yep. Andy and Wayne were involved basically with Colette and then the family that day, so they wouldn't have been aware of all the other circumstances. So what I didn't want was Andy and Wayne to be in a really hard position where they give a statement and then straight away they're going to get questions, and for them to give wrong information or misinformation. So it was like, you've just got to, this is really hard, but to give the statement, to explain that the flows will be coming, and try not to be drawn into what else may have happened or has happened, or because they would not be the ones that knew that information and could give accurate information to them.
And would you expect them to comply with those instructions that you've given?
Yes. Yeah.
We've heard from DC Parker in evidence that it was his view that as soon as the man was identified and there was nothing else criminal established, no one else involved, then the death, involved in the death, that it would have helped the family to get more information and to be provided with some answers to the questions effectively, if I can summarise it that way. And he didn't think that would have impacted on the integrity of the investigation, and the police wouldn't have lost anything in giving the family more information. Do you agree with that at that stage, when that second message is given to the Johnsons?
We didn't know what had caused the death of Mr. Bayo at that point at all, and I think we could have given them more information. Yes, I think we could have given them more information. Specifically what, you would have to be very certain as to what you're saying is correct and factual to make sure that you're not misinforming them, giving them wrong information.
And what's the danger of giving the wrong information?
Well, to then go back and tell them something different, then they're going to say, well, what's right, what's not right, what's fact, what's not fact.
What impact does that have on your work and your ability to complete your work?
They'll then start to question potentially everything that you're saying, and which is not what you want. You want to have a good relationship with the family and be able to give them precise updates.
Was there any information at that stage that you gave to Mitchell and Parker that referred to or used the words forceful arrest? Do you remember those words being used by you at any time?
No. I take it that word's not in the statement either.
It's not in the statement, no.
No.
Okay. The second message did involve, would you like to have that back on the screen, the handwritten statement? Yes, if we could do that, please. So it's PS 05793. So it's a handwritten version. But if I read it, following an incident this morning in the Hayfield Road area of Kirkcaldy, officers from Police Scotland have been attempting to arrest Sheku Bayo. So there was mention of arrest there.
Yes.
During which he became unconscious. So there was mention in the statement of the word arrest. Was there anything, when you shared that statement with Mitchell, anything you said about the word forceful?
No.
Or force being used?
I read that out and made sure that he was writing it down.
Right. I'd like to go back to asking about the flows. And who was appointing flows that day? Now, we've touched on flows and their potential involvement, but was Police Scotland involved in appointing flows?
I don't know the answer to that, whether it was Police Scotland or the Park.
Right.
I do know there was talk about appointment of flows, but where they were coming from, I don't know.
Who was talking about that?
That would have been mentioned by D.I. Robson.
In the role that you were carrying out that day, would you have expected to know more about who was appointing family liaison officers?
Not necessarily. I don't think I would be, you would expect it would happen at some point, but, I wasn't involved in that, no.
Is there a particular person who is responsible for appointing family liaison?
The decision for deploying a flow would normally rest with the SIO.
Right. So, looking at paragraph 95 of your inquiry statement, okay, 95, you talk about, I remember being told flows would be involved in liaison with Mr. Bayo's sister. I said that's fine, but asked if that a reason to delay flow deployment. Later in that decision was made to give an initial message before the flow. There was a delay in getting the expertise there to deliver the death message. I remember saying we can't delay and wait for them to come a long distance away to do that. That's why that was then pushed on. And the decision came from senior management. My point of contact would have been Colin Robson. It's through him that would have been confirmed. And that was later in the day, not 10:45. I just wonder if you could explain a little more to the chair about what was going on in relation to the delay regarding the appointment of family liaison.
I remember sitting, and the flows were mentioned quite early on, and you think, right, great. and then time just started to move, and then they're still not coming, and then you say, right, what's happening? Oh, they're potentially coming from elsewhere, and I just felt on that day, I thought there was a delay in relation to getting the expertise out.
And can you help us understand how the flows help? What benefit can they bring to this situation?
I'm not a flow. However, flows for me are deployed in certain circumstances, things like child deaths, unexplained deaths, potentially suspicious deaths, murders, and they are the direct point of contact and normally remain that point of contact throughout an investigation. I think they're good because it's continuity, it's the same person that you speak to, you can get a good working relationship with that person. I've seen cases where flows end up going to funerals and things like that because there is a bond created. So they've got training in relation to, well, actually I don't want to comment on the training because I don't know what the training involves for a flow. But they do attend a training course in relation to family liaison.
So they have additional training and
Yes,
skills in
yes.
relation to liaising with the family.
Yes.
Can you explain to me, are they primarily to assist the investigation or are they primarily to assist the family?
I would say, well, they're police officers and they're there to gather information, but they're also good for a family. So you could argue what's more important, but they are police officers, they're there to gather information, they're the point of contact, but I think it's good for a family when you have a flow, so you don't get passed between contact centres and things like that.
Mm. Now we've heard evidence from DC Parker that you asked him to brief the flows at a meeting that day. Do you remember asking Parker, or perhaps Parker and Mitchell, to brief flows that day?
Now that you've said that, I think I do. I think I remember saying to them, I don't know what time the flows arrived, but that would make total sense for me, because if you're an officer who's spoken with a family and can give an indication as to, what they've exactly been told, how that conversation has went, and what they're likely to face when they go there, I think that's a good thing. So that makes total sense if Wayne said that I did that.
Do you remember when that happened?
No.
Would your daybook help you?
I don't have anything in my daybook in relation to the flow deployments and asking me to do that, but it's just when you've said that, I think I'm pretty confident that did happen.
And do you remember roughly when that briefing took place?
No.
Do you remember where it took place?
No. I wasn't present during any briefing between the flows. I think I've probably just said to Wayne, you need to go there when the briefing's done.
Who would have been arranging the briefing for the flows?
I don't know.
Who would have been responsible for arranging the flows?
I suppose it depends at that point whether this is controlled, is past the park by this point, or whether it was Police Scotland. I don't know that.
Do you know if these were police flows or perk flows?
No, I don't know.
Do you know if those flows had contact with the Johnsons or anyone?
No, I don't know.
Do you know if there were ever flows put into place for Colette Bell?
I don't know.
And you've said already that you didn't attend any meeting between Mitchell and Parker and any FLO.
No.
We may hear that there was another briefing for flows on the 4th of May, the day after. Now, I know you don't have any entries in your daybook for that date. Do you remember being involved in any way with flows on the 4th of May or in relation to a briefing for them?
No.
Can I ask you about something else? CCTV? Can we look at your inquiry statement, paragraph 53, please? And it says, I've been told there's an audio of an airwave call I made. I'm aware I made this call to the control room. I've been told at 13 minutes past midnight onwards, I say, it's basically we have CCTV recording in one of the vans that is attending at the locus, where the male has been found dead after altercation with the police officers. There is a possibility that the CCTV in the van covered the incident, so the on-call detective super's asking for the out-of-hours TSU or whoever can download that footage to be called out, called to duty and do it. They're basically saying they need somebody out yesterday to do it. I'd like to ask you some questions about this paragraph. First of all, do you remember what van you're referring to there?
I think that's one of the police vans that's attended the scene.
Do you remember anything more about the van?
No.
How did you come to know that there was CCTV recording in that van?
I don't know that.
Do you remember how that information had been received by you, or any conversations you'd had about it?
No, it's something that you would ask though, because there are CCTVs in some police vehicles in the vans.
Mm-hmm.
So that may have just been something I've thought, right, if there's CCTV in one of the vans, we'll try and get it.
Is there any reference in your daybook about CCTV that you can find?
Yes. So it's PS 01067.
We'll get that up on the screen if that's okay. Right, so tell us where we can find this.
And then I've got 10:02 hours.
Oh, right, on the left-hand
On
side.
the left-hand side, TSU
10:02
East.
hours. Is this the 3rd of May again?
Yes, yes.
And TSU, what does that stand
It's
for?
a Technical Support Unit.
Right, and what's underneath that in your daybook?
East.
East. Right. And the time given, 10:02 hours, is that the time that you noted this, or does it signify something else?
No, I think that's the time that I have either phoned the TSU or got their number at that point.
So is this at 2 minutes past 10 in the morning on the
Yes.
3rd of May?
You mentioned earlier it was at 0:13 hours. That's actually, I think, 13 seconds into the call rather than after midnight.
My mistake. So that's into the actual call rather than
So
the
it's
timing of the
13
call.
seconds into the call that I made early on the 3rd of May, trying to get the CCTV for the van.
Apologies, that's my mistake. So this was at 10 in the morning on the 3rd of May?
Yes.
And you have been in touch with the TSU, Technical Support.
Yes.
Tell us who you spoke to at Technical Support.
I don't know who I spoke to.
Tell us about the conversation.
Well, what I could tell you is that is my call to the control room, basically saying that I need to get the TSU out because I'm trying to, you can tell by the way I've said it, that I'm trying to impress the importance of getting that out.
Uh-huh.
And from memory, I think the TSU come out. I think they come out to try and secure the was it hard drive in the van?
And you've said in the conversation, in your statement, there's a possibility that the CCTV in the van covered the incident. Mm-hmm. And so the on-call detective super, that's Pat Campbell, isn't it?
Yes, it would be, yeah.
Asking for the out-of-hours technical support unit, see if they can download that footage. And tell us what happened about that.
If I remember correctly, I think it was faulty.
Right.
But I think I knew that before I phoned. I think I knew there might have been a fault. So just as in that day, we think it's not working. But I was like, no, I'll get the TSU out because just because it's not on a screen, it might still be recording.
Is there an easy way of playing CCTV that's recorded within the van itself?
I don't know how the van CCTV works.
Right. Okay. But you knew there was some sort of issue?
Yeah,
Some problem?
Yeah, yes.
So talking about it now, does it remind you where the information came from?
Sorry, no, it doesn't.
And were the TSU, as far as you're aware, able to help with that fault or that problem?
I don't remember seeing the TSU that day, but it was a case of get them out, try to get that from the van, and I don't know what happened with that after that.
Thank you. Can we have a look at paragraphs 74 and 75 of your inquiry statement, please? Now, perhaps if we look at the previous page, actually, you've got the hard copy, you'll see this is a series of questions where you're being asked about the completion of paperwork.
Yes.
And you've been asked a number of questions about this, and you've given details
Yes.
in your inquiry statement. And you are talking about situations where you have previous experience of this type of scenario.
Yes.
And you say at 74, I've never had a situation where an officer has refused to provide any of these documents. And that was you being asked about paperwork like statements, use of spray forms, use of force forms.
That's right.
Okay. I've never heard of a senior officer completing a junior officer's paperwork.
That's correct.
I've never been involved in a case where that's happened. And then at 75, you say, in my previous death in police custody case, all of us officers provided statements. There was no difficulty with obtaining them. It predates the MIT and PERC, you're talking mid or early 2000s. I believe it was investigated, but I don't remember if it was another division. It would have been Fife Constabulary. It was a male deceased, the male was white. It was in Dunfermline custody. And I'm interested in your experience of having been involved previously in a death in custody situation. And you've explained there that you had that previous experience, but you'd never come across a situation where officers had refused to provide the documentation, and documentation being statements, operational witness statements, use of force forms, use of spray forms if applicable. Could you tell us a little bit more about this experience that you had?
That was when I was, I checked, and I think it was 2007. I was a detective constable at Dunfermline CID, and part of my duties were to go and speak to people that were in custody. So I would go down regular to the areas in the cells and basically just speak to people that were in custody. And on that occasion, I went to a cell at Dunfermline Police Station, entered the cell, and found a male who was unresponsive. Exited the cell and went and spoke to one of the custody care staff who was in feeding other prisoners at the time, explained to him that there was an issue, and the custody care officer immediately come straight in and started doing CPR and trying to help.
In that experience that you had, was there any suggestion in that scenario of wrongdoing on the part of the officers? Or potentially?
Certainly for myself, I went to a cell door, seen something was happening, tried to get help. So at no point did I feel like I'd done anything wrong on that occasion.
No, I'm not suggesting that.
But in terms of his earlier time in custody, I don't know if there was any officers who at that time thought, we've maybe not done something quite correct here. I really don't know about that.
But as far as you know, in that case, all the officers had given completed the paperwork, given statements.
I gave statements, I could say that for certainty. I don't know if there were other officers who didn't give statements,
Right.
but I can certainly speak about myself.
So you're not sure about possibly other officers?
In terms of other officers, no, I don't know that because I wasn't involved in the investigation into it. I was effectively asked to provide a statement.
So when you said you've never come across a situation yourself where an officer has refused to provide any of these documents, does that mean in your own experience you've not provided You've not failed to provide documents.
I've not failed to provide documents when I've been asked in relation to a police incident.
And you're not aware of any others who have failed to provide documents?
No.
Can I ask you to look at paragraph 79, please? Because you do say here, if the officer is a suspect, then I won't expect them to provide a statement. If they're witnesses, then they're police officers, so operational statements. If you don't know their status, then you capture evidence and then at that stage assess where you are. As an investigator, I would want the officer's statements, but if they refused and there's other evidence, you'd capture that and return to the officers to be declared witnesses or suspects. Can we go through this paragraph, please? When you say if the officer is a suspect, then I won't expect them to provide a statement. And why would that be?
Because if the officer is a suspect, they would then be entitled to legal representation. They would have to be then cautioned and afforded rights as a potential suspect, and they're under no obligation to provide anything other than to provide their name, date of birth, place of birth, nationality.
Thank you. If they're witnesses, then they're police officers, so operational statements. What does that sentence mean?
That means to me, if you're not a suspect, if you're a witness in a case, for me, you're a police officer, you would then compile your statement and submit it to the inquiry.
Is this like your statement from the 4th of May?
Yes.
An operational statement?
Yes.
And then if you don't know their status, then you capture evidence and then at that stage assess where you are. And what do you mean by that?
If you don't know their status. Well, you can ask questions of anyone up until the point they fall into the suspect category. Okay, and now during this full inquiry, all the people that we were speaking to, as far as I was concerned, nobody fell into a suspect category for anything in relation to Mr. B. We were capturing the evidence as witnesses. So what I'm saying is if you don't know their status, I actually don't know what I mean by that, because really someone's a witness or someone's a suspect.
Right.
That's probably a better way to describe that, and you try and capture that information.
Okay. Where you've said at the end there, return to the officers to be declared witnesses or suspects. What do you mean by declared witnesses or suspects?
Well, you know, that's where someone would make a decision. If there is ambiguity around about someone's status, that's when you would say, no, that person's a witness, we will go and try and capture a witness statement from them. However, if there are evidence to suggest that they had done something criminal, then you would expect an officer to make an assessment that they are a suspect.
And if they're a suspect, they're not obliged to give you a statement?
That's correct.
Even when they are police officers?
That's correct.
But it remains possible for a suspect to provide a voluntary statement should they wish to do so?
Yes.
They're not prevented from doing that if they want to?
No, suspects can speak to us if they wish to.
And you've said here as an investigator you'd want officers' statements. Is that something in the circumstances here on the 3rd of May you would have found helpful?
Yes.
And can you explain why?
Because that would give you specific detail of what happened at the time of the police contact.
So as an investigator involved at that stage of the investigation, you've talked earlier today about gathering in information and speaking to people. If the status of an individual is confirmed as a witness and they're not a suspect, would you, you've talked about them being police officers, would you expect an officer to cooperate with a request for a statement?
Yes, I would, but then at the same time, I wasn't in a position where I've just been involved in contact with a male who subsequently died. So see, until I'm in that position, I wouldn't want to judge what these people have done. It's easy for me to sit and say, oh, come on, let's get your statements, but actually until you know what their status or what their status is, I can totally appreciate why someone may not have given a statement.
And what would you expect, what information would you expect to give to officers in that situation to confirm or declare or clarify their status for them?
Well, you would just actually, you know, and be open and honest with them and say, listen, at this stage, you're a witness to this investigation, and we're looking to try and capture information from you.
And can you tell us whether the lack of statements from the officers who attended Hayfield Road impacted in any way on your investigation on the 3rd of May?
It wasn't my investigation. I was a small part in that investigation. You know, would that information have been good? Yes, I think so. I would have liked that information, but again, I wasn't in a position where those police officers were in a canteen, not knowing what's happened.
Right, thank you. I'm conscious of the time, and I've not
Yes.
quite finished with this.
Well, that's a convenient
unfortunately.
point to stop. If you return tomorrow morning, please, Detective Inspector, we'll sit at 10 o'clock.